Hello, everybody. I am Adam Serwer, a reporter with Mother Jones, and I'm here with Katherine Mangu-Ward of Reason Magazine.
Hey, Adam. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well in this season of Herman Cain.
Right. So the big story right now, I guess, is Herman Cain's sexual harassment allegations, and I have to say that I'm sort of shocked that of all the things that have happened with Herman Cain in the past month, this is the thing that gets him in trouble. I guess I'm not shocked. I mean, like sexual harassment stuff is like really great for reporters because they can cover it without being ideological. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I don't have to take a position or look like I'm taking sides with something like this. I can just be like, this is sexual harassment. It's sexy. Everybody wants to read it, and it's like candy.
Right. Well, except for, of course, that because it is a story that's happening during a primary election season, it has to be political. So we've got your various high-tech lynching overlay. We've got your Anita Hill overlay. There's really just like a bunch of efforts to turn this essentially like, are you really surprised Herman Cain has some sexual harassment skeletons in his closet story into kind of something with political relevance? Although I will say that I think the line that he's taking, right, which is like, I have this irreverent sense of humor. America, you've already seen it on display in the debates. These women misunderstood my intent. And I actually think that's not a great line to take, since if random young ladies at the National Restaurant Association could misunderstand his intent to the tune of $35,000 settlements, maybe like dictators of other countries might similarly misunderstand him. I mean, I think it's definitely a leap, but one of the roles of the president is to be a communicator, and he's clearly not a very clear one, even if he's a super entertaining one.
Right. I think the other problem with that explanation is it like it works really well in like a cigar-filled room where everybody's swirling glasses of brandy and everybody's male. You know what I mean? But as a like, you know how women are, they overreact to everything. That explanation doesn't, go over so well in a country where like a significant part of the electorate are women who, deal with people who have to, like, at some point in their professional lives, deal with someone who's being inappropriate, who, like, thinks they're just being funny and irreverent.
I actually did not totally get the like, Christopher Hitchens, ladies aren't funny and don't get humor thing from that. So it's interesting to me that you did. I got, like, everybody misunderstands me. I'm just so wacky. Like, I guess I didn't really read the sexism angle into it.
I might be attributing what other people have said about Cain to. I don't know that he's actually made that argument, but certainly many people have made that argument on his behalf. The sort of, how women are, they overreact to everything.
Right.
And there's certainly, like, when he sort of tried to explain the gesture that led to the sexual harassment argument, it sort of didn't really make sense.
Yeah. Should we both try and do our interpretations of the gesture now? There's something about the chin and hands.
Yeah, I don't totally get it. I don't totally get it. I find the whole the high-tech lynching thing was really fascinating to me, just because I wasn't politically conscious at the time that the Clarence Thomas hearings occurred, but it strikes me that this is actually a very different set of circumstances. In that, Politico's reporting on allegations that happened, and were settled a long time before Cain started running for president. So it's not as though it's like Cain's running for president. But this is terrible. So, one of his accusers is coming forward and saying, no way am I going to let this happen. This is what this guy did. It's not even that kind of situation. It's like they're literally reporting on something that happened a really long time ago.
Right.
So the sort of the general, I think, conservative view of the high-tech lynching, quote unquote, which is a euphemism I really can't stand, is that it was sort of a deliberate plot to take Clarence Thomas down. Whereas, like, I don't think you can even make that argument in the case of Politico. I'm sure people are. but it's sort of hard to say that that a media organization reporting on the existence of something is the same thing as like a deliberate plot to push Cain out of the race.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably make like a vague media biasy type argument, right? Like maybe this percolates up to the level of a story and wouldn't in the case of another candidate, but I actually don't even think that's accurate. I mean, this is, as you started out saying, this is like a great little juicy, right. Like we are all sick unto death of the Republican primary already. Thank God for this sex scandal. Thank God for a little bit of something to spice it up. Although we seem to be, today, we've gotten kind of these weird poll results, which is that Republican primary voters don't seem to care about this story. What do you make of that?
I think that they care. I think that right now I think right now support for Cain is an expression of defiance towards what they feel like. Whether or not they think the allegations are true, I think Republican voters are. First of all, I think Cain was not going to get the nomination to begin with, just based on the fact that he's had so few endorsements from this sort of party elites. Mm-hmm. But I think that I think that Republicans right now, they're sort of rallying around him and expressing support for Cain as a way of saying, I don't believe the smears against Herman Cain, but I don't think it necessarily translates into I'm actually going to vote for him or actually want to see him in a matchup against Barack Obama, for the White House in 2012. I'm not sure that I think wait a couple weeks and we'll see whether he's actually the scandal has actually affected him.
So that explanation actually kind of calls to mind the other explanation that has a lot of currency for Cain's popularity, which is that it's a protest vote against the inevitable Mitt Romney juggernaut, right? And I actually think that's sort of interesting that both of these explanations for why people are saying they like Herman Cain are not actually that people like Herman Cain. But I don't actually think that's true. I mean, when you talk to people who support Herman Cain, your sort of basic, like, do a poll of your aunts and uncles type thing. Not that actually any of my aunts or uncles support Herman Cain. I feel like I should note that just for the record. But, random passersby, people don't say, I told a pollster that I like Herman Cain because I hate Mitt Romney. Or they don't say, I told a pollster that I like Herman Cain because I don't like the fuzzy allegations of sexual harassment that he's being smeared with. They say, I like that guy. He's straightforward. He's not like the other sleazy politicians. So I would wonder about this kind of like two-step of explanation for support for him.
I don't think that people... I should say that I don't think people are the Republican Party is ultimately going to nominate Herman Cain. I don't think that I wouldn't say that people, if I guess walk it back, I wouldn't say that people don't like Herman Cain. I think Republicans like Herman Cain a lot. I don't think necessarily that they believe he's the best candidate. Particularly sexual. I mean, it's sort of sad, but this is the kind of stuff that people worry about when they think about candidates and candidates imploding. In the general election, they think about stuff like this. I mean, like. I guess the sort of, the example that conservatives can point to of reporters sort of ignoring a story was the John Edwards story, back when, of course he was cheating on his wife and she was sick with cancer. But I think that actually has a lot less to do with him being a Democrat and like almost 99% to do with the fact that his wife is extremely sick and people didn't want to dredge that up. People were like really sort of worried about dealing with that situation. But I mean, if he had actually gotten the nomination, that would have been a total disaster for the Democratic Party.
Well, I think actually there is another parallel between the Edwards story and the Cain story, which is that at least my understanding is that insiders at the time knew that Edwards was such a skis and that something like this was bound to come out, that they didn't see him as a threat, right? Like that right. Hillary and Obama were seeing each other as their main rivals, even when the polls were showing a fair amount of popularity for Edwards.
Yeah.
There was just this assumption that he would sort of take care of himself. And you could certainly say the same about the Cain campaign, that, you know, he wasn't taken seriously for a very long time and basically still isn't by certain kind of in-the-know establishment types, because he can kind of be relied upon to implode. But that said, I found in the little corner of the political universe that I inhabit, which is populated by crazy libertarians, there has been a weird kind of bump of support for Herman Cain. That there's a certain kind of like Ron Paul supporter person who sees something similarly appealing in Herman Cain. And I don't know whether it's like a speak truth to power thing, whether it's actually some of his policies, which are, you know, decently libertarian, I guess, as far as the available slate of Republican candidates go, although still not libertarian in any particularly robust sense. But that there is this idea somehow that people who are less politician-y are more appealing to ultimately be our elected leaders. And you know, I don't know whether that's misguided or right on.
I mean, you know, for me, I think the thing. So Herman Cain said a lot of stuff that bothered me over the past month, which is part of why I'm sort of, you know, I'm sort of weirded out by the fact that this is the thing that got him in trouble. But the thing that I think really sort of scratched behind my eyeball was I'm going to build an electrified fence to you know, that's going to kill would-be migrants across the border. That's a crazy thing to say. I mean, like, I think that's a crazy thing to say. I mean, because there's, you know, the law in the United States for a long time, until recently, has not treated illegal immigration as a capital crime. and so, you know, you know, at first he was joking about it, and then he realized that some people actually like the idea of, you know, illegal immigration being punishable by death. But that's like, you know, among the certainly the least libertarian things I've ever heard Herman Cain say. You know, it's just, you know, there are all these people, you know, these are people who, for the, you know, overwhelming majority of whom are coming across the border not to commit crimes or do anything like that, but because they really want to get decently paying jobs and provide for their families. And I just don't know how you could, I mean, like, even if you think that illegal immigration is a really serious problem and it needs to get under control, I don't understand how you could look at these people and think, you know, I'd like to see this person electrocuted if they try to come over here.
Well, I think actually the kind of dehumanization of the illegal immigrant is something that Republicans are ramping up more and more. And it's certainly something that I find to be a dismaying trend. But in particular, the use of the word illegals, the way people use the word like blacks or Jews, you know, this sort of, or like aliens, right? Like there's these, you know, these kind of, rather than illegal immigrants.
I would just say that it's not blacks, it's the blacks, or the
blacks. That's true.
In front of something, it automatically
is,
sounds more. It automatically sounds like you're trying to say something.
Although if you say like, we should build a fence to keep out the aliens, I think at that point it's pretty clear you're talking about ET, and maybe we support that. So, although, you know, open trade barriers with all, including all planets. Yeah, I'm a radical free trader, I suppose, to that extent. But I think this notion that somehow like illegal alien immigrant barbecues on the border on our electric fence are even part of the political discourse is because of this one-upsmanship that's happening on the stage every time there's a Republican primary debate and the issue comes up. So, and actually in that respect, right, there's this weird kind of Rick Perry bubble where he sort of is like apologetic for seeing immigrants, illegal immigrants as people. You know, it's like, I'm sorry, but my heart, you know, sometimes you got to think with your heart and not with your head. And it's like, well, actually, there's some pretty good think with your head cases for, you know, offering educational opportunities to illegal immigrants or...
Right, and he's made them. I mean, like, I think, you know, when if he's talking about the border fence, he's like, you build a 30-foot high fence, you know, the 31-foot high ladder comes in. And, like, that's a really free market way to look at immigration. You know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty conservative thing to say, and yet it's not something that the base wants to hear at all.
Right.
Even though it's like technically, I mean, sort of like that's the whole point. that's the whole conservative argument against excessive regulation, right? It's that they don't work and they just make things worse.
Well, and that that incentives matter, right? And that the incentive to come across the border is just
stronger
than
enormous, making it illegal.
Although somewhat diminished based on our crappy economy, which is another point that I always think is worth making. That actually border crossings are way, way down right now, not because of anything that has been built at the border or any new policy, but just because people come here to work, and right now there aren't as many jobs.
Right, and what's interesting is that whenever there's there have been studies that have been done, and whenever we develop whenever there's a crackdown on the border, whenever we put more in this case we put more people and flying robots at the border, what happens is that it goes border crossings go down for a little while, but then what you have is people figure out how to get across. And then the cross border crossings go up again. So it's it really is that 31-foot ladder thing where there's a period of time where new efforts at ramping up enforcement at the border can diminish border crossings, but ultimately people just figure out a way to get across, even if it's exceptionally dangerous. And the biggest thing that changes is that more people die. Trying to get across because it's more dangerous because they figure out more and more incredibly perilous ways to make it. But it's not that people stop. I mean, people it's not the kind of thing that it's not really the kind of situation that you can solve through enforcement only measures.
I should note that since we're bashing Republicans for being just utterly abysmal in immigration, and they are. That the Obama administration has been a pretty big disappointment on this front as well. In particular, in September, I think we quote unquote celebrated the 1 millionth deportation by the Obama administration, and Bush managed to deport 1.5 or 1.8 million or something in his entire presidency. So deportations are way up. And there's this kind of rhetoric that, okay, well, it's true we're deporting more people, but we're focusing on violent criminals, we're trying not to break up families, and some of that is true, but the flip side is policies like this story that broke in the LA Times last month about the alien transfer program or something like that it's called, which takes people who are found crossing the border in Texas and deports them south of the California border and vice versa to discourage just sort of boomeranging back into the country. Right. The idea that is considered an appropriate thing to do by an administration that's simultaneously saying we're more humanitarian, we're trying to do the right thing here, strikes me as pretty amazing. I mean,
it's a crazy dynamic because it's a matter of a complete absence of competition. The Republican Party, what you have is a situation where this administration came in on the strength of incredible Latino support. There's some ridiculous, I forget the number right now, but there's a ridiculously high percentage of Latino voters who know someone who is undocumented. Right. It's not so much that most Latinos are not undocumented, but an incredibly high percentage of Latino voters know someone who's in that situation. So when you have an administration that is deporting 1 million people already, we're not even at the end of the first term.
Yep.
I mean, that causes significant disappointment among this group of people who are crucial to Obama's reelection, and yet instead of going for that group, instead of trying to sell themselves to that constituency, what you have is Republicans working as hard as they can to signify their fundamental hostility to this group of people as human beings, which is mystifying. It's mystifying when you think about the fact that it was 2006 when George W. Bush's big, his second big project for his he was going to pass immigration. He got close to doing it.
Yeah.
And that whole element of the party is non-existent. You couldn't have a candidate who ran on that now, who could win the Republican nomination. And it used to be the opposite. It used to be that you kind of had to be an immigration moderate. And now it's just not the case.
We also have, I think, a kind of Prohibition era hypocrisy dynamic going on, right?
Yeah.
We have this sort of professed dry politicians who are privately, they have a locked cabinet full of whiskey, right? And this is, of course, the Mitt Romney. I can't hire an illegal immigrant. I'm running for president for Pete's sake. Which, first of all, for Pete's sake, yes. God, I love Mormons. I just love them. But also, the way it's phrased reveals so much, right? It's not, I can't hire illegal immigrants. They have higher rates of rape and murder, and I am afraid for my family, because that's not true. Right. It's not, I can't hire illegal immigrants because they do bad work. That's not true. It's not, I can't hire illegal immigrants because I think the minimum wage is a super awesome policy, because that's not true. Right. It's, I can't hire illegal immigrants because I have to pander to this section of the electorate who hates those darn aliens. Mm-hmm. And that's it. He basically said that on the stage, and everyone kind of nodded and said, yep, that's true, that's how it is. And I have this ongoing dream that there'll be something similar to like National Coming Out Day for gay people, where it'll be like, I employ illegal immigrants day, and successful, normal people who are otherwise law-abiding citizens will just come out as employers of illegals, because that'll be awesome. And
what's crazy is that a lot of people did that. A lot of the, back in December of last year, when the Dream Act, when there was a possibility of the Dream Act passing in lame duck, all these college students came out and were like,
that's right.
I'm an A student and I'm majoring in engineering, and my mom brought me here when I was 5, and please don't send me back to a country that I've never been to in my life.
Yeah.
That I can remember. I mean, it's a crazy sort of situation, and it's like I think the prohibition sort of metaphor is really, really apt. I mean, there has to be. My theory is that if you allow a certain this is like a tipping point where if you allow enough low skill immigration, a guest worker program, something like that. If you allow enough people to come into the country to do those kinds of jobs legally, there's like a tipping point where people will feel like their chances of getting into the country to get work are good enough that they won't think that risking crossing the border is worth it.
Right.
That's sort of and there's I don't know where that number is. But I think if you do that, and not only that, but there's a whole cyclical migration process is ruined by the fact that there's some people who literally some liberals are really opposed to the guest worker program, but it doesn't bother me because I some people want to come here and work and then they want to go home. They don't actually want to stay here, and a lot of those people end up staying here because they don't want to risk coming across again. But I don't know. It's immigration policy is a big source of frustration for me, in part because it takes the Obama administration is more strict on enforcement than the Bush administration, and not only on the one hand you have liberals who really want to defend that as though it doesn't violate their stated principles, and on the other hand you have Republicans pretending as though the president is implementing some sort of massive backdoor amnesty. Right. And just the entire conversation takes place, in a sort of alternate universe that has almost no relationship to what the actual facts on the ground are.
The other sort of parallel universe aspect of the conversation is the comparison to previous waves of immigration. And there's this fantastic book by Jason Riley, who I think was and still is on the Wall Street Journal editorial board. And he just looks at the data of how current Mexican and Latin American immigrants behave compared with Irish and Italian immigration in particular. And one element that he brings out in that book, which I was previously not aware of, is that there was a tremendous amount of back and forth, particularly on the part of Italians, that people didn't emigrate and stay and become American, which is sort of this argument that's offered for why all these darn Mexicans are just different. But that actually Italians went back and forth many times. They would come and earn a big chunk of money and then go back for a while, and that people went back to retire to the old country after a lifetime of work in the United States, and that the notion that somehow there's been a change in the dynamics of immigration because of this desire to go back and forth, and that'll somehow be pernicious or undermine American culture, I think is particularly unfounded. But it doesn't really matter how many studies there are about how, like, second-generation Latino immigrants all speak English and, go to American schools and are totally American by all demographic measures. I just think that's really somehow not what it's about. Like, it's about outdoing each other.
Right. I mean, it's sort of a weird situation, right? Because when you have a situation like now, when illegal immigration is really going down, and the number of undocumented people in the country is decreasing, it's because of the economy, and people don't really feel particularly generous. On the other hand, when you have an economic boom, and people are working, they also, like, the rationale behind, letting other people, get involved in that is, I mean, people don't want to do that either. The argument, it's sort of a weird situation where they're despite the fact that immigration is good for the economy, when people's sort of economic instincts go in the opposite direction.
And actually, that sort of brings us to another topic that we had planned to talk about, which is the economy sucks. What is going on with the various and sundry occupies? And in particular, I'm just interested in what is it that's made Occupy Oakland so different from, the other kind of flagship occupies around the country, right? Like, the rest of them are these sort of, like, nice and semi-annoying hippy-dippy protest things, whatever. Mm-hmm. But Occupy Oakland is all flashbangs and shattered windows, and how did that happen? And is it? I mean, my inclination as a general skeptic of police power is to say, like, man, the cops started it. Mm-hmm. Screw them. But I don't know if that's true. And there is this sort of dynamic where most of the Occupy Oakland people are pointing to these kind of, like, the black hats, right? Like, that there are these anarchists who have supposedly infiltrated their movement and are vandalizing and causing trouble in a way that the bulk of the occupiers don't endorse.
Right. Like, so the anarchists are kind of the lefty version of the Tea Party people who showed up with racist signs. You know what I mean? Like, they're sort of, they're always there at lefty protests, and they always try to, turn it into, excuse my language, they always try to turn it into a shit show. And I think that they were able to do that in Oakland. I mean, if you read the accounts of what happened, you have people shouting them down, trying to get people not to overreact, not to do anything crazy. And they don't care because they have a completely, they want to cause a mess. I mean, that's to them, that's not sort of an incidental effect of what's happening. It's something that they want to do. And it's frustrating for the people who, in the Occupy movement in Oakland, who are actually sort of trying to get a message across.
Although, and this gets back to the same question that's been asked about the Occupy people all along, which is, what is that message again? And that's sort of maybe a separate topic, which we can beat that dead horse a little bit more here or not as you like. But I do think it raises the question of, to what extent is any movement or any rally or any protest responsible for the kind of fringe viewpoints or kind of more extreme elements that are inevitably attracted to those protests, right? So, like, in the 90s, like, anytime more than, like, 12 people, or maybe in the early aughts, anytime more than, like, 12 people stood together in a place, like, somebody showed up with a Free Mumia sign, right? Mm-hmm. But we didn't say, okay, those 12 people want a Free Mumia. We understood that there's just, like, certain categories of people who are attracted to protests and want to be a part of that. At the same time, I do think there is a difference between, a bunch of people kind of implementing, shutting down ports and graffitiing cars versus some jerk who shows up with a racist Obama sign, right? Like, the racist Obama sign guy is still essentially following the rules of peaceful protest. Mm-hmm. And there were the few people who came to the Tea Parties with guns. And I think those people, we can happily lump those people in with the more kind of inappropriate elements of Occupy. But the occupiers are many and the anarchists are supposedly few,
Well,
can't they protest their fellow protesters?
Especially when it comes to like police. I mean, police are they're police are obviously they have an extremely tough job, and they start getting really worried about protecting themselves. They overreact and do things like what happened in Oakland. I mean, I thought the police response in Oakland was ridiculous and excessive. But what these people know is that they know that cops will go out of their way in order to protect themselves, and they're taking advantage of that. I think what you bring up is sort of an interesting issue in terms of like, I think during the Tea Party, liberals weren't really thinking about this sort of, relationship to the fringe back when how much responsibility does the mainstream group retain for the fringe back when, there were no lefty protests, and now it's sort of something that
suddenly it's a very live issue on both sides, yeah.
Right. Now it's like with the on the one hand you have like some people showing up with anti-Semitic signs, and on the other hand you have people doing a Cole Nidre service on Occupy Wall Street. I mean, like it's interesting. I'm not sure I have like a clear answer or even like super coherent thoughts about it. I do think it's interesting in the sense that it's not the kind of issue that liberals were really thinking about back when the Tea Party was sort of the only group around.
Well, the other question is, what is the equivalent group to the kind of violent Occupy Oakland anarchists on the right? I mean, is it Michigan militia? Is it somebody else? I mean, I think
like the Waffle House guys.
Maybe the Waffle House guys. I mean, I don't like
the elderly Waffle House terrorists.
The fogey attackers are.
That was sort of a weird story, because I think like in some ways that had the most of like any of the sort of right wing terrorist incidents that have happened. That had like the most connection to like they had based their thing off a weird like internet novel by a Fox News guest, and one of the guys would like occasionally rant at Red State. But like it's clear that these guys were like on another level of crazy. And I think it's almost surprising to me. I think because so much of the liberal energy is tied up in Occupy Wall Street and sort of like that economic populist argument. You didn't see a whole lot of these guys were Tea Partiers, these guys are classic Republicans, all Republicans think like this.
Right, and that contrasts pretty strongly with the Anders Breivik, whose name I'm probably mangling.
Breivik, but yeah, I can't pronounce it either.
Where there was this incredible flurry of, let's find every posting he ever made on the internet and see if we can kind of connect him up with the Republican bugaboo of the moment. Mm-hmm. So I agree that there's definitely attention is a limited resource, and the Waffle House people have probably benefited from their moment in history. Much as Rick Perry and his like crazy, intoxicated question mark speech have benefited from the Cain mania. I mean, even when you watch the full version of that speech, this is not an out of context problem. Something very weird was going on there, and everyone's kind of said like, yeah, that was weird. Let's talk more about pizza. So,
well, okay. So I want to shift back to Cain for a second, because there's something. I don't know if you saw this ad this morning where Cain the Cain campaign put out an ad that says, this is a high-tech lynching. This is just like Clarence Thomas.
Right.
And I just want to express my like extreme distaste for the term high-tech lynching, because, I think 100% of lynching victims would prefer the high-tech version because it leaves them alive and not mutilated.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, it's like this term lynching, like, it's such a powerful term that evokes, one of the worst periods in American history. And it's like, when you start throwing it around, I mean, like, I think part of what bothers me is that the phrase has come to, like, it's not just that it draws more weight from Jim Crow to explain something that actually isn't really very similar to an actual lynching. But the other thing that bothers me is it almost seems like a code like this is the type of racism that you're supposed to be upset about. So when you say high-tech lynching, you know that what that really means to a conservative audience is there's a conservative black person who is being attacked.
Right.
So like now this is something you need to worry about. This isn't the kind of silly racism that liberals are always whining about. This is the real thing.
So I was just reading Steven Pinker's new book, which is about the decline of violence throughout human history, and it's this like enormous brick of a book. And one of the things that he does in it is just put gajillion charts in there, all of which are downward trending of bad things, right? And his idea is to just kind of show like it is easy to underestimate the extent to which civilization has come on us, kind of globally and in particular in the developed world, and so utterly changed the lens through which we view the world that we can't even comprehend how like violent and hateful and awful the world was for most,
or like this
human
country
history.
was too,
or this country was, right? And so one of the charts is actually it's just lynchings, and it shows it's from 1900 to 2005 or something like that, and it just is of course this like incredibly dramatic downward trend line. And I almost think, and this might be like a bit Pollyanna-ish of me, but I almost think the fact that this phrase high-tech lynching exists and that people can use it, any people with a straight face, is a sign of just the incredible progress that we've made in a few short decades, right? Like, even though people are alive today, very much alive, who remember a time not that long ago in American history when lynchings, actual genuine, like involving the bumpers of trucks type lynchings were happening, it's simultaneously so remote from our experience of the world in 2011, our experience of America in 2011, that that people can use that word. And of course, there is a backlash because it wasn't that long ago. But this trend line is so remarkable that I think it almost shows, the fact that we don't have the sensitivity to that word anymore because it doesn't happen anymore, really.
Well, I'd say this. I think that, I think you're right in the sense that it is remote for most of it. I mean, it still happens. Like, you still get the press releases from the Justice Department every day where it's like, someone's house was firebombed and, this person, like lynchings still happen, it's not like it was in, by any means where we're talking literally like mob
like
killings
many
that
orders
are carried out
magnitude.
with the tacit support of the state. I mean, they still have, but you're right. I mean, it's not something, we're not living in that kind of environment anymore. And it's remote enough for people that sort of statement can be used. My problem is that I think and I think you're right that because that part of the reason people use it is because we're very far from that. But the problem with that is when you use it, I feel like it has a way of erasing the memory of what actually happened, and I think that bothers me as well.
See, I think I would almost say it's the reverse. It's the memory of what actually happened has already been erased, which is why people use it. And I think it's quite right to say, this is something we should remember. This isn't something we should forget. But we essentially have forgotten it, and that's why people use this phrase. And that's a good thing, but also a bad thing when it leads to deeply ridiculous political discourse, which is what we are currently mired in.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm sort of watching. I just think the whole Cain drama is fascinating to watch, just because I think. I mean, I know somebody else has made this argument, but I think Cain is a little like Palin in a way, in the sense that his biography is of such symbolic power to conservatives that, it's really meaningful. And I don't necessarily think there's anything sinister about that. I should say that, like, I think it's obvious that Barack Obama's biography was really powerful for liberals, and I think Cain is similar to Palin in that's also true.
And if we have to have a sort of a circumstance in which Republicans are annoyingly patting themselves on the back for something, to have it be two candidates in a row where they are annoyingly patting themselves on the back for really liking a woman and a black dude, that's okay.
I mean, it's a sort of progress, right? I mean, I think there's a cynicism to it, especially, like, I mean, for some people. I mean, I think, like, when Rush Limbaugh starts complaining about people stereotyping Herman Cain, it sort of makes my head explode. You know, because, like, so much of what I mean, like, he compared Obama to Mugabe. a while. He's like, yeah, I mean, Obama's economic model is Robert Mugabe. He's going to take, like, who like, Mugabe is is a dictator who stole white people's farm. I mean, like, it farms in Zimbabwe. I mean, it's like such a crazy comparison that is, like, relies on such incredible, not just black stereotypes, but sort of like third world African stereotypes. It's just insane. So to hear Rush Limbaugh being like, you know, this whole Herman Cain sexual harassment thing, they're just bringing up, you know, this old canard of the predatory black man. I mean, like, it just drives me nuts.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to say about it because it's so cynical. I mean, coming from him. I mean, I understand that, like, a lot of people really do like Herman Cain, and that it's not all that kind of cynicism, but, you know, you look at something like that and you have to ask, you know, why is this the only circumstance under which, why is it that someone has to be sort of a declared conservative to get this kind of outrage on their behalf when there's a possibility that they're being disadvantaged simply because of the color of their skin? I think that's what bugs me about it.
The other question is just, when are we going to stop listening to anything that Rush Limbaugh says, ever? And there was a minute there where I actually thought that was happening, right? There was a kind of, at the kind of beginning of Obama's first term, it seemed like Limbaugh had gone so completely insane in that last cycle, and had kind of, like, jumped the shark, and, you know, people had stopped quoting him. And I guess I wonder whether, you know, bringing up Limbaugh on the stereotype of the predatory black man is just kind of trawling in the weeds for ridiculous Republicanness, and knowing that Limbaugh is always, like, a place to find that. But maybe he is our curse. He is our cross to bear. We are saddled with Limbaugh until the day that he finally goes off the air. Right and left.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the more amazing moments, and I actually think, I mean, I don't know this, but I suspect, I mean, there was a moment on Fox News where Charles Krauthammer asked Herman Cain whether he thought this was coming up because he was a strong black conservative. And I don't know this, I don't have any inside knowledge of Charles Krauthammer, but I almost, like, think he asked that question just to see if Cain would take that road. You know, and he absolutely did, and Krauthammer was like, well, do you have any evidence of that? And Cain was like, no. Which is an extraordinary thing, right? I mean, because we've spent I feel like we spent the last year or so hearing that accusing someone of racism is, like, the worst thing that can ever happen. And yet here's Herman Cain, admitting, frankly, you know, I don't know if this has anything to do with racism, but it's a high-tech lynching.
Right.
That's wild. That's why, and I almost think, that's a wild thing to say.
Well, Cain is also, I mean, he's on the record historically making a big deal about how he's an American first and black second. I mean, he says ABC, I'm an American black conservative, and the American comes first, right? That's his. Yeah. And you got to admit, the guy has a gift for the the 999s and the ABCs, and he's catchy, but you know, to have sort of made this big deal about how, you know, he's an American first, he's conservative, that you know, the blackness is not particularly relevant, which you know, is, I think, an admirable thing to say. And then you know, when the chips are down, to suddenly be hopping on the lynching bandwagon, to make some metaphors, you know, is not impressive, but also not surprising, right? I mean, you know, he is a politician. He is, you know, in the midst of a completely unexpected, once-in-a-lifetime, holy moly, he could, under some insane circumstance, actually get the Republican nomination. And, you know, I think it's in human nature, and particularly in the nature of people who go into politics, to do anything when that moment shows up. And that's one reason that people hate politicians.
Do you think I mean, I've been sort of astonished watching this, but like, you know, when Romney first started out, it really did seem like his strategy was to avoid. I mean, he was from the beginning, you know, thinking about the general, and his strategy seemed like it was to avoid, you know, saying anything crazy and letting his other opponents implode. And at the time, given that Romney was sort of the most distrusted because of his association with the Massachusetts healthcare plan. Now it seems like that strategy is working. I mean, we sort of like gone through a cycle of candidates, each who have had their moment, and the only one who's still standing and has been standing from the beginning without like profoundly embarrassing himself is Mitt Romney.
Yep. Well, I mean, I actually am saddened by the rise of Herman Cain for many reasons, but one is that he's pulled the I'm a businessman rug out from Romney a little bit. For obvious reasons, I would like to see Romney play up that part of his resume and that part of his, and he does, right? He says, I've had a real job and I've created jobs, and, you know, he uses that line to pretty good effect pretty frequently, but, you know, by using the strategy of distancing himself from the rest of the candidates, he's also not characterizing himself, right? He's not kind of being a personality, and I think that could have been his personality. Excuse me.
That's okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just so I think you're right that this sort of don't embarrass yourself and hope for the best thing is weirdly working in a way that didn't look like it would before. But, you know, Cain keeps hanging on.
It's not just working, it's working extraordinarily well. I mean, like, you know, for Romney, you know, this, you know, there was this big, you know, for a while Democrats thought they were going to get an advantage by saying, look, Republicans want to cut your Social Security, they want to cut your Medicare, and that's, you know, and these programs are popular. And here's Mitt Romney, who right now it looks like he's going to emerge from the Republican contest as the hard on immigration, as the immigration hawk / defender of Social Security, because of his, you know, because of his fight with Rick Perry, which is kind of amazing. Are
you trying to make me cry? Are you trying to just make me break down right here on Blogging Heads and Grief?
I mean, I'm not. No, I promise I'm not trying to make you cry. But I think, you know, on some level, it's really it's worked out for him really well. I mean, it's extraordinarily well. I mean, and I suppose, in a sense that, you know, it causes consternation among libertarians, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that he is essentially the like government hands off my Social Security candidate, and he's gonna ride that one to the general.
I mean, but like, you know, given that Paul Ryan had sort of, you know, set the standard for sort of Republican policy seriousness, it's kind of extraordinary that Mitt is looking more and more conservative to conservative voters. And he's the guy who's defended. So when he comes into the, you know, when Mitt wins the nomination, Barack Obama says, you know, Mitt wants to cut your Social Security. Mitt can say, actually, I defended Social Security against Rick Perry. Look at me.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I don't know. I just think that's really kind of impressive from a political standpoint.
Well, it follows in a proud tradition of Republicans trading off protecting entitlement spending in order to protect other kinds of spending, or in order to protect other elements in their agenda, right? And this is the sad history of attempts at budget reform starting in the 80s. You know, Reagan in particular says, okay, you know, we'll protect entitlement spending if we can also protect defense spending, and you know, I think we're just seeing that in its 2011 version, you know, in which Romney's saying, I'll protect Social Security, I'll protect your health care benefits in some to-be-determined way, you know, if you elect me, and meanwhile I'll do, you know, these other kind of conservative things. So, you know, the idea that somehow the Tea Parties and that Paul Ryan were going to make this election about debt and deficit control and small government, I think has unfortunately turned out to be completely false. And certainly it's pretty unlikely that Mitt will be able to pivot and do, you know, be making that case in the general after he's essentially decided not to go with it in the primary.
Right. I mean, but that's sort of what's extraordinary, right, is that he's coming out of this looking more conservative than people thought he was when he went in, but he also has, like, all these things he can say in the general to make himself look moderate.
Seem really moderate. Yep. Well, I think he actually is moderate. I mean, I think you know, if there is a true Mitt Romney, and there's a case to be made that there is no such thing, but you know, somewhere in his heart of hearts, if we have to decide which is which, I think he's pretty moderate. I think, you know, he was the governor of Massachusetts for Pete's sake.
Well, look, I'll say this. I don't think it matters if there's a real Romney. I think the real Romney is the Republican Party, if that makes any sense.
Sure,
I mean,
he's an avatar of the Republican Party.
Right. So I think in general, like, there's too much emphasis on individual politicians. Like, you know, maybe Barack Obama is secretly a Kenyan anti-colonialist socialist, but it doesn't matter. He's a Democrat, and he's going to pursue, like, the sort of left-center Democratic agenda. And sort of the craziness of wondering what, you know, politicians are thinking in their heads is sort of useless. I mean, like, maybe Romney is secretly pro-choice. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, and we do see that, right, in the way that the Obama first term is played out, right?
Right, exactly.
You know, whether or not, and there was this whole, I hate the word meme, but there was this whole meme of, like, Obama secretly agrees with me, and he's just not saying it because, me being kind of a liberal person, because, you know, he has to win the election, and once he does that, he's going to do the right thing. And while that's been true, I think, on gay rights to some extent, and certainly ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell is awesome, and some of the federal benefit stuff has been great, on a host of other issues, including executive privilege, including immigration, including war on drugs, he is an avatar of the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party isn't especially liberal. They suck on that stuff, just as Republicans suck. So, just as Republicans suck on fiscal issues, right? So that's, I think you're right that the emphasis on the man himself is probably overblown, but you know, maybe we're looking at the margins. And I think in particular, if you think that, you know, Obamacare and what's going to happen with healthcare in this country is one of the biggest issues facing us, you know, the existence of Romney Care is something that could matter an awful lot on the margins when Romney gets into the general and potentially into the Oval Office.
Well, I just think that, you know, there's all this focus on Romney flip-flopping, and in some ways, like, yeah, it's like, it's funny because he's made all the, you know, part of Romney's problem with the flip-flopping is not so much that he's changed positions, but that he's argued so passionately in one direction or the other before switching positions, but it's really the party that's changed significantly. And he's representing the party now. I mean, that's what he's saying. He's saying everything that you believe now, I am willing to be the champion of that. And that's why, you know, it's weird that voters really do, I think, make a lot of decisions based on personality type stuff. But really, you're just voting for one party or the other, and that, you know, and that's sort of, and there's this illusion of voting for a candidate when you're really just actually voting one of the two parties into power.
Well, I will say, I think we have to wrap up, but I will say in closing that that very fact has consoled me on cold, dark nights when I imagine a scenario where Herman Cain becomes president. Right? It's like, luckily, even if the sky falls, like, he'll be hemmed in by his party and by the apparatus of the state and by, you know, a gajillion advisors who are old hands. And, you know, even, you know, Sarah Palin in the White House, even Herman Cain in the White House, even, you know, Dennis Kucinich in the White House, doesn't actually spell disaster for the country. It just means there'll be kind of the same amount of statist muddling along that we've always had. So
someone's going to be there to be able to tell him where Becky stand is.
Oh, God. On that depressing note, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been great talking to you, Catherine, and I look forward to next time.
Likewise.
All right, thanks a lot. Take care.